My stepbrother told me my late father's classic car was sold to a scrapyard after his passing. Yesterday, I saw that exact vehicle parked in the driveway of his new girlfriend's house, fully restored and registered under his name. It was completely rusted through. Chloe, my stepbrother Julian, had told me over a cold lunch 3 months ago, sliding a wrinkled, grease-stained receipt across the table. The frame was cracked and the engine block was seized solid. Believe me, I wanted to keep Dad's 1967 Mustang Fastback just as much as you did, but the junkyard only gave me $400 for the scrap metal. It barely covered the towing fee. I remember staring at the piece of paper, a heavy lump of grief hardening in my chest. I am a senior compliance officer for the State Department of Motor Vehicles. My entire professional life is built on tracing titles, verifying registration histories, and spotting fraudulent asset transfers. But when it came to losing my father after a long illness, I let my grief override my professional instincts. I trusted my stepfamily. I took the $400 Julian handed me as my half of the scrap value, placed my father's old key ring in my jewelry box, and tried to accept that a piece of my childhood was gone forever. For 3 months, I carried that quiet sorrow. My father and I had spent countless weekends in our grease-stained garage, turning wrenches on that vintage candy apple red fastback. It wasn't just a car, it was the physical anchor of his memory. To think of it crushed into a block of anonymous metal felt like a betrayal of his legacy. The fragile illusion of that scrapyard certificate shattered into a high-gloss reality at exactly 5:30 p.m. yesterday. My job requires me to perform random field audits on independent vehicle registration blocks within our county district. I was driving through a quiet, upscale neighborhood 3 towns over, cross-referencing an unverified commercial transport plate, when a flash of brilliant candy apple red paint caught my eye from a long, winding driveway. I pulled my vehicle over to the curb, my heart suddenly hammering against my ribs. Parked outside a pristine colonial home was a flawlessly restored 1967 Mustang Fastback. The chrome trim gleamed under the afternoon sun, the paint was immaculate, and the custom exhaust tips were exactly like the ones my father had ordered from a specialty catalog. But it wasn't just the color that stopped my breath. As I walked closer to the property line to look at the windshield, I saw a tiny, distinct blemish, a small, crescent-shaped scratch on the lower passenger side of the glass, where a loose wiper blade had slipped during a thunderstorm when I was 12 years old. I stood on the public sidewalk, completely frozen, my analytical brain automatically fighting against the sudden rush of anger in my chest. I pulled out my state-issued tablet, opened our secure, encrypted DMV registration database, and entered the vehicle's classic, vintage license plate. The digital ledger refreshed instantly, and the truth was laid bare in cold, unyielding text. The vehicle hadn't been scrapped. The identification number matched my father's car perfectly. According to the state registry, the title had been transferred from my father's estate directly into Julian's name, using an unverified, abandoned vehicle salvage affidavit, circumventing the standard probate cycle. 2 months later, the registration had been updated to reflect a classic vehicle status, completely active and fully insured, and the primary garage address listed on the active insurance policy, it belonged to a woman named Vanessa Vance, Julian's new girlfriend. The calculation behind the lie left me entirely numb. Julian hadn't towed the car to a junkyard. He had towed it directly to a high-end specialty restoration garage, paid for the mechanical overhaul using estate liquidity he claimed didn't exist, and hidden the vehicle at his girlfriend's house to keep me from ever finding out it survived. He had watched me cry over a forged scrap receipt so he could drive my father's pride and joy on the weekends. I took 3 high-resolution photographs of the vehicle, logged the active registration file into my secure personal archive, and drove home. The suburban streets looked completely normal, but inside my car, the compliance officer had fully replaced the grieving daughter. When I arrived at our house, my husband Sarah was in the kitchen setting the table for dinner. She looked up, instantly noticing the rigid posture and the quiet focus in my eyes. "Chloe, what's wrong?" she asked, setting down the salad tongs. "You look like you're in the middle of a regulatory audit." "I am," I said, opening my tablet and sliding the official title history printout onto the kitchen island. "I just found out where my dad's Mustang actually went." Sarah read through the registration history, her expression transitioning from confusion to absolute disbelief. She remembered the nights I sat on the porch staring at old garage photos, missing my dad. She knew exactly what that vehicle meant to our family infrastructure. "He lied about a scrapyard to steal a classic car," Sarah whispered, her fingers tracing Julian's name on the title line. "And he used a salvage loophole to keep it out of the probate distribution." "Chloe, this isn't just a family dispute. This is direct title fraud." "I know," I said, my voice flat and level. "He thought because the vehicle was kept 3 towns over at Vanessa's house, I would never cross paths with it. He forgot that the state records don't have a blind spot." The phone on the counter buzzed. It was a group message from my stepmother, Miriam, coordinating our regular weekend family dinner at her house. Julian had already replied, stating he would bring the dessert. Are we going? Sarah asked, looking at the screen. We are going, I said, closing my tablet with a firm, decisive snap. But we aren't going to argue, and we aren't going to cause a scene. We are going to let them finish the main course, and then we are going to present the compliance report. I spent the next 48 hours compiling the disclosure file. I pulled the original estate inventory documents, the fraudulent salvage affidavit Julian had submitted to the regional office, and the active insurance policy cross-references. I didn't want an emotional confrontation filled with shouting and denials. I wanted an ironclad, undeniable case file that gave them zero room to maneuver. Miriam's dining room was warm and smelled of roasted rosemary potatoes on Sunday evening. My stepmother was busy fussing over the centerpiece, while Julian sat in the armchair, sipping a soda and talking about his recent promotion at his logistics firm. He looked completely relaxed, a man who believed his secret was safely locked away in a girlfriend's driveway 30 miles away. Chloe, dear, you've been so quiet tonight, Miriam said as she passed the bread basket. Are things stressful down at the county office? The office is fine, Miriam, I said, setting my fork down and placing my hands flat on the table. But my field audits have been very interesting this week. In fact, I ran a routine vehicle registration check in the Northern District on Thursday. Julian paused, his soda glass hovering halfway to his mouth. His eyes darted toward me, a sudden, subtle tension tightening around his jaw. I found a beautiful 1967 Mustang fastback parked on Laurel Avenue, I continued, my voice retaining that precise, neutral cadence I used during formal state inquiries. Candy apple red. It even had the exact same crescent-shaped scratch on the passenger windshield that my dad's car had. The dining room fell into an instant, suffocating silence. Miriam looked confused, her eyes moving between us. Chloe, what are you talking about? That car was destroyed. Julian gave us the paperwork from the scrapyard. Julian forged the scrapyard paperwork, Miriam, I said smoothly, reaching into my bag on the floor and sliding 3 bound copies of the official state title history across the table. One for Miriam, one for Julian, and one for the record. This is the active registration file. The vehicle is currently registered under Julian's name, hidden at his girlfriend's property, and funded through unrecorded estate transfers. Julian's face turned a mottled, furious red. He slammed his glass onto the table, his voice rising into a defensive, sharp register. Chloe, you are completely out of line. You used your state databases to spy on my personal assets. That is an abuse of your position. I'll file a formal complaint with the district supervisor. Every document in that folder was accessed through standard public records requests under the State Freedom of Information Guidelines, Julian, I responded calmly, looking him dead in the eye. As a compliance officer, I don't need a loophole to read the law, but you certainly used one when you signed a fraudulent salvage affidavit claiming the vehicle was an abandoned wreck. Miriam snatched up the folder, her hands shaking as her eyes scanned her son's name on the certified state title. Julian, is this true? You told me the car was junk. You told me the garage said it was a safety hazard. Mom, it was junk, Julian hissed, turning frantically to his mother. I spent thousands of dollars of my own money to restore the frame. If I hadn't taken it, it would have just sat in probate forever or been split into pieces. I saved Dad's legacy. You didn't save it, Julian. You embezzled it, I said, sliding a secondary legal memorandum across the tablecloth. By filing an abandoned vehicle affidavit on property that belonged to an active estate, you committed Class 3 title fraud. That carries a mandatory state registration suspension and a referral to the county prosecutor's office. Julian froze, the defensive arrogance completely draining from his posture as he looked at the official state statute blocks highlighted in the folder. He realized that my position at the DMV didn't make me vulnerable. It made me the ultimate authority on his mistake. What do you want, Chloe? Julian muttered, staring down at his plate, his voice suddenly small and thoroughly defeated. You want to force a public sale? Destroy the car just to get a check? I don't care about a check, Julian, I told him firmly. I care about the vehicle my father built with his own hands. Here are our terms. You have until noon on Tuesday to sign the standard title transfer form assigning 100% ownership of the Mustang to me. You will also cover the registration modification fees. I placed the blank state title transfer document on the table alongside a pre-addressed envelope. If the certified transfer isn't on my desk at the regional branch by Tuesday morning, I continued, I submit this entire compliance package, along with the neighborhood field photographs, directly to our fraud division for immediate processing. The registration will be frozen, and the vehicle will be impounded. Miriam looked at her son, her disappointment heavy and silent in the quiet room. She didn't defend him. She simply closed her folder and walked out of the dining room, leaving Julian alone with his paperwork. With a sharp, bitter sigh, Julian snatched up the pen, signed the transfer form at the kitchen table, and shoved it into the envelope. He didn't say a word as he stood up, gathered his jacket, and left the house, the front door clicking shut behind him. By 10 a.m. on Tuesday, the courier envelope landed on my desk at the county branch. The title transfer was fully executed, notarized, and clean. This afternoon, Sarah and I backed the Candy Apple Red Fastback into our own garage. The engine purred with a deep, vintage rumble, the mechanical restoration perfectly executed. I stood by the workbench, holding my father's old key ring, before sliding the primary key into the ignition. "How does it feel?" Sarah asked, leaning against the fender with a warm smile. "It feels steady," I said honestly, tracing the small scratch on the passenger windshield. "The family dynamic is broken, and the trust with Julian is permanently gone. But the legacy isn't hidden in the dark anymore. We still have a long road of family boundary management ahead of us, and Sunday dinners are a thing of the past." But as I looked at the car sitting safely in our garage, I knew the ledger had finally been balanced. The title was clean, the fraud was archived, and we were finally standing on our own solid ground.